Hello everyone, I'm back with yet another Batman themed video this week, and that seems entirely appropriate given that this is the 85th anniversary of the creation of Batman. And in recent weeks I've been looking at toys related to the Batman films, and today I'm excited to be looking at the first video in a series of 4 or potentially 5, looking at the recent McFarlane Toys Batman Forever wave. Now I've got to hold my hands up and say that Batman Forever is probably my least favourite Batman film. In fact, I find it very difficult to watch. And that's kind of interesting and a little bit contrary to how this film is perceived or was received at the time of release, because this film was massively successful, even though it had and introduced a lot of the elements that would later be criticised in Batman and Robin. Obviously, it's Joel Schumacher directing, and he introduced the controversial things like bat nipples and things like that, and obviously the very strong camp vibe that runs throughout both of those films. Now, I have a soft spot for Batman and Robin, as I've talked about many times, and I think of the two, it's actually a lot more watchable than Batman Forever, and that's just me personally, but I think one of the things that weakens Batman Forever for me is actually the performances. Val Kilmer's performance as Batman is not bad, but it's quite bland, and there's not a lot to it. There's not a lot of charisma there, interestingly enough. Meanwhile, we have the direct contrast there with Jim Carrey's Riddler and, of course, Tommy Lee Jones's Two-Face. Both actors, in my opinion, very wrong for those roles, and both played to extremes and very, very camp, which really I find quite difficult to watch. And yet, having said that, I grew up with these films and I loved them as a kid, and I still have affection for it, even though I find it a difficult watch now as an adult. So, strangely, as a collector, I'm still kind of excited to get my hands on these figures, because one of the things I did like about those films, actually, some of the costumes, particularly the Batman costume, I think is actually really quite cool. So, without further ado, let's start looking at these figures, and today I'm going to focus on Batman, and I'm going to follow up with the others in due course. So if we take a look at this packaging, of course we can see it is the standard DC Multiverse branding. It is that slightly wider, oversized packaging that we sometimes see in this line. I'm not really sure it's necessary for these figures, given that we're not really getting anything really huge in this packaging that couldn't have been in the more condensed or slimmer version. And by now, if you've seen any of my other videos, you'll know I'm not a huge fan of the DC Multiverse branding. It tends to be quite bland. Obviously, this is largely open window display, so we can see the figure there. Behind him, we can see the collage effect made up of different comic books across DC's history. And this is quite colourful. It does help the figure pop in the packaging and draw attention to the figure, especially with the contrast between the darkness of the costume and the bright blue of the collage. And whilst we're looking at the interior card inlay, you will also see that it comes with the standard trading card, the standard display stand, but also the slightly larger display stand, and indeed a metal pole here, which is to support the Build-A-Figure, which is the giant bat. But despite all that, to me, I just find this packaging to be a little bit bland. It's not the most displayable, it's fine, it's just so uniform, and it's just not an awful lot going on to make it distinctive and visually interesting. And we can see that again if we look at the side panel here. It just has the name of the film and the character, and it's just lacking a little bit. At least here we do have the logo taken from Batman Forever. We see that question mark with the bat symbol in the middle. That's quite good. That does at least distinguish it from other films and figures in our collection, but it still feels like there's a lot of space here that could be utilised by having a really a nice image, either the film poster or a still taken from the movie, something like that. That would make this, a lot more visually interesting if you choose to stack your packaging on its side on a shelf, for example. If we look at the reverse of the packaging, really interestingly, they've led with an image here, an illustrated image, a conceptual image of the giant bat, because of course this didn't really make it into the film. Apparently there's a director's cut out there that might be on its way, where we'll see this in action, but they haven't got a still of it here. They've just got an illustrated image of it, and that's it. There's not really a lot to write home about this, and it's not really displayable in my opinion. Okay, so let's take a look at the figure itself and how does this stand up. Now, I have to say, I think this looks really good. The presentation of this figure is really cool. I really like the colouring they've used on the body. It really captures that metallic sheen and it just catches the light really nicely. And if we focus for a moment on the head sculpt, I think they've actually done a really good job of capturing the likeness of Val Kilmer here, even though they haven't got an awful lot to work with. Obviously, you really only got that chin, that jawline there, but they've managed to capture it in terms of the eyes, the lips, and proportions. This all looks pretty accurate to my eyes, and I think they've done a really good job, especially in this scale, being 7 inches. It's not a lot of room for fine detailing, but they've managed to capture enough here that's quite convincing. And whilst there isn't a lot in the way of paint taps on here, obviously we've only got the chin, the lips and the eyes, they have done a decent job with this, I think. I would have liked maybe a little bit of a wash running through the actual, the top of the cowl there, to draw out some of that, detail that we see, particularly near the ears. But nevertheless, I think they have done a really good job, and I think this is probably one of their better likenesses, actually. I really like the approach they've taken to the body sculpting as well. They've got an awful lot of detail in here, pretty much everything I would expect. This looks pretty faithful to my eyes. I'm not an expert, but this seems to have all the appropriate dimensions when it comes to the logo and things like that, the bat symbol, and the individual grooves and bits and pieces on the torso. This looks pretty faithful to my eyes. Like I said, I really like the material they've used for the plastic because it's got that metallic sheen there that catches the light just right and just creates that glossy effect that we see in the movie. Also, this contrasts nicely against the matte tone of the gloves and the boots as well. And whilst we're talking about the gloves, we can of course see that they've got the accurate fins there, which are a little bit more subtle, I think, and less spiky than the Michael Keaton or some of the subsequent Bat costumes we've seen across the years. But I also really like the belt as well. The silver paint there and the gold highlight just really makes this figure stand out, and it just looks really presentable. I am very pleased to report that this has a cloth cape. I always prefer that in terms of they having multiple textures on a figure and having greater flexibility with my capes. But it also means, of course, that this can sit in the Batmobile that is accompanying this wave, which is very exciting indeed. My only criticism of the cape is that it can't really fully wrap around him, and it is quite thin material, so you can see through it, which is less than ideal. Let's take a look at the articulation. He has a ball joint at the top of the neck, so he can spin his head all the way around. It will lean left and right a little bit, but I wouldn't say this is really articulation as such. He can bend his head forwards and backwards though, a really healthy distance, which was surprising but really pleasing to see. He has ball joints in the shoulders and a butterfly wing joint, which is fantastic, so we can really get his arm into some great positions here. He's got the complementary bicep swivel, a double joint at the elbow, so he can get his fist all the way back to his head there, and then he's got that weird joint that McFarlane Toys insist on using, which is a sort of ball joint with a pivot on it, so the wrist can rotate all the way around and it can kind of hinge forwards and backwards. Now, there are 2 points of articulation in the waist, 2 ball joints, one at the lower waist and one in the upper torso, allowing the figure to swivel from side to side, lean left and right in pretty extreme poses, and of course, he can also bend forwards and backwards a pretty healthy distance as well. So this is fantastic, meaning you can get an awful lot of posability out of this figure and put him into some really cool dynamic poses overall, which is lovely stuff. He's got ball joints in the hips, the legs will kick out to the side, they'll kind of twist side to side as well, but there's not a lot of give here in truth. The legs will kick forwards a little bit and they'll go back a little bit as well, not huge amounts, but enough. There's a double joint at the knee there, so that lower leg can kick all the way back, and then we have this swivel at the top of the ankle to allow the foot to swivel from side to side, and then there is also a hinge here as well, allowing that foot to arc forwards and backwards, and of course we have toe articulation. But that's not all, because he also comes with a host of cool accessories as well, including an additional pair of gripping hands, a smaller standard batarang, a slightly larger batarang that's specific to Batman Forever, and his grapple gun. And as you would hope and expect, he has no problems gripping these various accessories in that standard gripping hand, which is absolutely fantastic. He can hold multiple accessories at once because of course he's got 2 gripping hands there, and I think overall these accessories combined with the articulation this figure offers and the flexibility in the cape allows you to create some really interesting dynamic poses with this figure, which is absolutely fantastic. I love that as a collector because it means your displays can be really interesting and fun, and the possibilities are almost endless really. So I think this is a great figure actually. I think it looks really, really good. But before I wrap up with my final thoughts, I thought it might be interesting to do a little bit of a size comparison and see how he fares against the Robin figure. And as you can see here, he actually stands a little bit taller than the Robin here, which I think is accurate to what we see on screen. I think the Val Kilmer's Batman was taller than Chris O'Donnell's Robin, or at least that's how it appears in the film anyway. So I think they've got the scaling here pretty much spot on, and this looks really good. So then, final thoughts from me. Well, I'm going to give this figure 5 stars, that coveted award, which I very, very rarely give out. So that is full marks for me, because there's really not an awful lot for me to complain about with this figure at all. I mean, anything I can think of is the smallest of nitpicks. Perhaps it would have been nice to have a little bit more of a wash running through the matte black that we see on the gloves, and the legs, and of course on the cowl. Maybe it would have been nice to have a slightly thicker cape, maybe a wire in the cape as well to make it posable. Yeah, these are all things you could potentially argue. Maybe an alternate head, a unmasked head, a Val Kilmer head, I suppose. Yeah, potentially, you could argue all those things, but overall, as a figure and as a package, I think they've done a really stellar job with this. I think the likeness is really strong, the articulation is fantastic, I think the sculpting and the paint apps that we see are really good and appropriate, and we get actually a pretty decent array of accessories, which is kind of unusual from McFarlane Toys. So I do feel like they've excelled themselves here and actually delivered a really fantastic Batman figure. So I think if you're a fan of the Batman Forever film, or any of the Batman films really, and you want to bolster your Batman collection, and maybe you missed out like I did on that special 6-pack that the Amazon exclusive from last year or the year before, you're probably going to want to get your hands on this, and I think it certainly lives up to expectations. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please do consider giving the video a like. That kind of thing really does help the channel out, and it allows me to keep making more content. And if you're interested in seeing more content, remember to hit subscribe, as there'll be plenty more videos coming soon.